Welcome to the Laman Yilmedu B'Chsanim teacher training course. This shir is going to focus on how a woman attains the Nida status. You'll follow along with the slideshows. An introduction to the halachas, that there are four general topics that the halachas cover. First, how a woman becomes a Nida, then how to behave while she's a Nida. There are the dinim of Halachic, midiraisa, midirabanan. The details will be discussed. The third is how does she become back to Haira after she has become a Nida. That's a whole process. There's numerous steps to attain Tara status again, which culminates with the Tvila in the mikveh. And then number 4 is the dinim of the vestes. Chazal established that at certain times, although the woman is still not a Nida, but she needs to anticipate that she might become a Nida, and certain halachas result from that anticipation. These are called the dinim of vestes. So we're going to be covering all of these topics in the course. In order to understand the halachas well, there is a need to understand the basics of the reproductive system of the woman. The need for that we already find in Chazal. The Mishnah gives us a description of the reproductive system in the woman's body, and likewise in the later Poskim, in the Rambam, and Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch also it's brought down. So we will also cover that, although the Chsanim teachers that are being trained know these things already, but it is teaching how to teach it to the Chassanim. Of course, this is a very complex topic and it can be spoken about for hours and hours. The Chassanim do not need all of that info. They need the basics in order to understand the halachas well. So we start with a drawing of the uterus, of the rechem. In Chumash, the rechem is called either the rechem or the moker. Chazal called it also the cheder or the kever. In English, it's called the uterus or the womb. And specifically, when you look at the drawing, it is the upper parts, like the pear-shaped or avocado-shaped organ, and that is the uterus. The details, it shows here on the follow-up slides, the surrounding muscles, the outer walls of the uterus, called the uterine muscle, are thick, strong muscles. And on the bottom, there is the cervical canal, or called also the cervix. During pregnancy, the cervix tightens up to prevent loss of pregnancy. And by birth, a woman experiences contractions, which means that these muscles around the uterus contract and relax, which causes the cervix to dilate, and slowly it opens up more and more. It opens up to 10 centimeters to allow the fetus to be born. After birth, a woman has more contractions and it closes up again, but it doesn't close up all the way like during pregnancy. It remains open, a narrow opening, and in its normal state, the cervical canal is a narrow opening, very narrow, about a half a centimeter, but just enough to allow the sperm cells, the zera haish, to enter into the uterus, as will be explained further on, and also it is just big enough to allow dam nida to come through whenever that happens, which will also be discussed further on. So this is the cervical canal. So at this point you can explain to the chassid, he might know it from the Mishnah, from learning Rambam, that moshul chachomim be'isha cheder v'proizder, that the inner cavity of the uterus is that's the cheder, here. The uterine cavity, that is the cheder, and the cervical canal, that's the prosder, the whole way leading into the cheder. Sometimes also the next slide, the vagina, which is below the cervix, might also be part of the prosder. But usually we use the term prosder for the cervix. The vagina is below the cervix, and it is a bit longer than in this drawing. The vagina is called the Beis HaChitzon. That is the place where the husband's aver goes in during Tashmish. The aver does not enter the cervix. Only the zera will enter the cervix, and then the uterus further up, and the fallopian tubes. On the two sides are the ovaries. The Rambam calls this the Beitzei Ha'isha, and inside the ovaries, all the woman's eggs are stored. And leading from the ovaries to the uterus are the fallopian tubes, called in the modern Hebrew Chatzotzros, Chatzotzrot. The Rebbe also uses these terms in Igris. And then is the uterine cavity, which I showed you before. The inside of the uterus, of the walls, the inner walls, the cavity is kishmeikenu, a cavity, an empty hollow space. But on the inner walls, the inside of these muscles that surround the uterus, is called the endometrium. It's the uterine lining, the lining of the uterus. And the uterine lining is filled with blood vessels, and every month there's a signal coming from the brain to these blood vessels telling them to get ready for pregnancy. Preparation for pregnancy, as it says in the slide, which means the lining starts to fill up with blood. It thickens, that is visible in a sonogram or whatever. You can actually see that the lining gets thicker and thicker over the course of the month to prepare for pregnancy, so that if pregnancy happens, there should be a supply of blood ready to nourish the child, the fetus. So inside the ovaries, both ovaries, is a reservoir of eggs. A baby girl is born with all her eggs for life already stored in the two ovaries, which is different from a man. A man produces sperms throughout his life. A woman, whatever she's got the day she was born, that's what she has. But by a healthy woman, there should be a nice supply that should last for many years. The eggs are there from birth, as I just mentioned. However, they need to go through a process of maturation. They have to mature. So every month, a group of eggs enter some type of process of maturing. However, the majority, almost all, except for one usually, don't make it. They get lost. One egg gets prepared properly, and that egg will leave the ovary and enter the fallopian tube. That process, when the egg leaves the ovary and enters the fallopian tube, is called ovulation. In the modern Hebrew, it is called biyutz. Biyutz from the word Beitzah Isha. So the woman is mevayetzet, and in English it's ovulation. So she ovulates is the time when this egg is leaving the ovary, entering the fallopian tube. That is something that for the vast majority of women happens once a month. Every month, at some point, she ovulates. There are women whose cycle is different, and they might ovulate only once every 2 months or once every month and a half. But the vast majority of women ovulate every month. Usually, only one egg is being released. Sometimes 2 eggs might be released, or even 3, and that might be that might result in twins or triplets. There are also different types of twins where only one egg was released, but at some later point, within the first few days after conception, it splits and becomes two. That would be identical twins, whereas if it's two eggs that have been released and both have been fertilized, there will be non-identical twins. I usually explain that to Chassanim, not because it's relevant for understanding the halachas of Nida, but usually when this is the first time Chassanim hear about these concepts, or many or most of them at least. So it's just a curiosity they're trying to understand. Okay, so how does this work? And so that always comes up automatically. So I just explained this briefly as well. Okay, so an egg leaves the ovary and enters the fallopian tube. And on the bottom, you see here, two sperm cells are on the slide. In real life, they're not as big. They're microscopic. You would have to use a microscope to see them. Millions of, 100 millions of sperm cells are released in a given be'ilah by a healthy man, and they're not so far out away from the cervix, because the husband's aver should come either very close or even touching the outside of the cervical canal, and then the sperm cells enter through the cervix into the uterus. Now, when you look at the drawing, you see how there's a cervix, and then there's the uterus, and then on both sides on the top is like a narrow entrance into the fallopian tube. So the sperm cells have to come all the way up, and that is a very big distance proportionate for the sperm cells to get there. The vast majority of sperm cells will never make it to the fallopian tube. A big amount remains stuck by the entrance of the cervix. Some will enter the uterus and just roam around the uterus. And then some, the lucky ones, will actually make it to the actual fallopian tubes. Now, the egg, like we said before, once a month an egg is being released. It enters from the ovary into the fallopian tube on the other side. And the sperm enters from this side. When they meet up, if HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who is the third partner in creation, agrees to the deal, so to speak, one sperm cell will enter the egg, penetrate the egg, which will fertilize the egg and begin pregnancy. And that happens inside the fallopian tube. So here is a drawing how the egg is being attacked by all the different sperm cells. Each one wants to be the Zeicha Begeiro, but one of them succeeds in entering the egg, and as soon as that happens, HaKadosh Baruch Hu made it so that immediately a sort of shell is formed around this unit, preventing any other sperm cells from entering. And that starts this process of pregnancies. Fertilization, which is called in Chassidus Klitas Hazera, it's niklat. After fertilization happens in the fallopian tube, for the first 3 days, it develops in the fallopian tubes, the cells multiply, and then, and sometimes, that's what I mentioned before, sometimes during that stage, the fertilized egg, which is now called an embryo, splits into two. That would be identical twins, but usually it doesn't. Usually it remains one unit. So the embryo, after the first 3 days, will descend into the uterus and implant itself into the lining of the uterus. Anywhere on the inside of the uterus, that will happen. That might happen. And then from there starts the growth of the baby, which basically there's some bubble called the placenta grows out from the wall of the uterus on the inside, and a string, the umbilical cord, comes out from the placenta, and at the end of umbilical cord, that's where the baby grows and develops. But throughout the pregnancy, through the umbilical cord, through the placenta, which is attached to the uterine lining, the baby, the fetus, will get whatever it needs to be nourished, the blood, the oxygen, all the vitamins and nutrients, everything that the baby gets during pregnancy, all comes from that chibur, that connection point where it originally was implanted in the lining of the uterus. So if she indeed gets pregnant, so then that blood that has been gathering in the lining of the uterus is being channeled for the development of the baby. But what happens if pregnancy doesn't happen? A single girl before the wedding, or after the wedding, the timing wasn't right. The meeting between the egg and the sperm cell didn't happen. Or it did happen, but for whatever reason, HaKadosh Baruch Hu decided that it shouldn't click. There shouldn't be klitas zera. There shouldn't be fertilization. Or it was fertilized, but then it failed to implant. There's a lot of steps that all have to work out for pregnancy to succeed. So if it didn't happen for whatever reason, so blood is being collected in the lining and it builds up and it gets thicker and thicker and thicker, but there comes a point in the month where the body says, so to speak, okay, it's not happening this month, let's start over. And the body gets rid of this blood that was building up in the lining over the course of this month, and the blood comes out from the uterus, through the cervix, through the vagina, out of her body. That is called, in the fancy words, and it's called menstruation, but people just refer to it as a period. Chazal referred to it as a vesis. The woman got her vesis, dam nidah. In the modern Hebrew, they call it a machzor. The point is, this is a recurring thing that happens in a woman's body on a regular basis. All these words mean that period, it happens periodically, machzor, there is a machzoriyut to it, and likewise veses means a regilus. It's something that happens on a regular, ongoing basis, that every so often a woman will shed the lining of her uterus, and then the whole process will start all over again. There will be ovulation again at some point, and there will be the buildup at the same time of the blood in the uterus and the lining of the uterus, and then if she doesn't get pregnant, at some later point, she's going to have another period. Now, for the vast majority of women, from one period to the next is about a month. We find this also in Chazal, that the regilus is shloshim yom, and modern medicine says that the average is 28 days. It's the same thing about, it's just an average. I always make sure to explain this to the Chassanim, that they shouldn't expect a woman to be like clockwork. It's just not so. It's give or take. Some women will have a bit shorter cycles, some will have a bit longer cycles, and there will also be always a range. It can come a little bit earlier, a little bit later, give or take, 2-3 days before, 2-3 days later. So that is very normal. That's not a cause for concern. Yes, if the range is too big, that might be a concern and should be discussed with a doctor. It depends on the age of the woman, how big of a range is still considered within the norm, which is not. And at some later point in the chassan classes, I usually give them a shtickle rundown of what is normal, what is not normal. But around once a month, the majority of women will get a period. So here on this slide, there is a diagram of how the cycle works. So you see here that from day 1 through day 5 is the shedding of the blood lining. That's when she has a period and she's bleeding. Now, it's very important. The Chassanim have usually no idea what exactly this means, that blood is coming out of her uterus and out of the cervix and out of the vagina, and they might start imagining that blood is just gushing out there or something like that. So I explained that it's trickling out slowly, and till all of it is released takes about 5 days. Now here also, very important to point out, this is just a diagram. It can be 3 or 4 days, it can be 6 or 7 days. It can vary from month to month. It's not like every time it's going to be exactly the same. It's about 5 or 6 days. That's the average norm. But if it's only 4 days, it's not a problem. 3 days is also not a problem. If it's only a day or two, every time, only a day or two, that might be a concern. Needs to be discussed with the doctor. Also, if it's too long, 8, 9 days long, not once, but always, that would also be a concern. But on average, it's like in this diagram, 5 days. Then there's a few days which are called the womb prepares for potential pregnancy. Different hormonal changes that go on in the body. And then she ovulates. So here in this diagram, it shows that the ovulation is on day 14. The days before and after are also colored in the same color because it can, again, vary from what day to what day. And also, in order for pregnancy to occur, the relations between husband and wife do not have to happen right at the same time that she's ovulating. If they had relations within 48 hours before she ovulated, so the sperm will be inside the fallopian tubes and it can still work because it's still fresh enough to fertilize the egg. If the egg comes into the fallopian tube and there is no sperm there, or the sperm is already older than 48 hours and therefore it's not going to work, it can still happen within the next 12 or so hours. Afterwards, if sperm will get there, it might still catch the egg and start pregnancy. And then, if she did not get pregnant, I said before that at some point the body realizes, okay, it's not happening, and the blood comes out. But that's not exactly accurate. The body realizes that it's not happening right away. And then the body prepares for the period which will follow 2 weeks later by certain hormones calming down in our body, and that will cause that on day 28 in this diagram, but like I said before, it can be day 29 or 30 or 31, 32, around that, she will have another period. So when she gets a period, she becomes a nidah. That is the classical example of tumas nidah. However, the concept of becoming a nidah has two dinim. One din is in regards of taharis, touching, kochim, trumas, going to Beis Hamikdash, which we had in last week's Parsha, in Parsha Metzora. Chair that she sits on becomes tamei. If someone else sits on that chair, they become tamei and they can't go to Beis Hamikdash. All these halachas, the tara, tuma tara status in regards to kochim and Beis Hamikdash is not what we are covering when we're learning with Chasanim, because that's not relevant in Zman HaGolus. Until Mashiach comes, we don't deal with those halachas. Of course, we should learn these halachas, get ready for Mashiach's coming, and we learn about it in the Rambam, in Mishnayos and Gemara, and so on. But in Chasen classes, these aspects of Hilchos Nida are not covered. However, there is another halacha resulting from the Nida status, and that is what it says in this week's Pasha, in Pasha's Achlemos. When a woman is in a state of Nida, she becomes forbidden to her husband. She's an erba. It's an isur kares to have relations with her. we do learn out the definitions and the gedorim of what makes a woman a nidah from how it is described in Parshas Metzora in the dinim of Tuma and Tara. But the halachas that we are dealing with are the halachas, the application of the dinim of Parshas Achremos, that when a woman is in that state of nidah, she's an erva, and it's an isur kodesh to have relations with her. It's important for Chassanim to understand what happens when a woman has a period, besides just, okay, so blood is coming out, and that's it, then you move on. First of all, you have to explain to the chassan what happens. Blood is trickling out, it's dripping, dripping, dripping. She needs to put something there to absorb that. So some women will put a pad into their underwear to absorb it. Some women will use a tampon that goes inside the vagina to absorb the blood. This is relevant also in Hilchos Shabbos, where the halacha is that a woman is allowed to walk in Rishus Harabim with either a pad or a tampon. That's how I usually explain it to the Chassanim from a Torah perspective. All these things are very new to the Chassanim. So a pad that looks a little bit like a beged. She puts it inside her underwear to absorb the blood. It lands on the pad. So not only with a pad is a woman allowed to walk out in the Rishus Harabim, but also with a tampon, which looks like a stick that she puts inside the vagina and it absorbs the blood as soon as it comes out from the cervix. Also with that, she can go in the Rishus Harabim on Shabbos. Important that the chassan should understand that the period is causes physical pain and discomfort to a woman. Some more, some less, but most women will experience cramping, headaches, these type of uncomfortable bodily sensations while they're having the period. Usually it's more intense when it starts. Some women will experience the discomfort before the actual period begins, a few hours before, maybe a day before already. And usually it will go for the first day or two, but the pain and discomfort will not be so intense for the entire 5 days that she's having a period. But yeah, everybody's a bit different. It's an individual thing. It's important for the chassan to understand this. Then there is shift in emotional state. Because the period is caused by hormonal changes in the body, so that can cause a woman to feel like a bit down feeling, depressed type of mood. Some are more irritable. Little things will get them very upset. So the chassan has to understand that this is very normal. He shouldn't take it personal. He should be understanding and sensitive. Extra sensitivity is called for. Extra sensitivity means both in his attitude about it and how he deals with it emotionally, and also practically. He knows his wife got a period, and he knows that when she has a period, she has cramps, she has migraines or headaches, she's not feeling well for the first day or two. He should be helping out more at home, especially once there are children. B'ezras Hashem, he should understand it. Tell his wife, you go lay down, rest up. I'll take care of the kids. I'll give them supper and put them to sleep. Things like that. And also emotionally, that if he knows that she's more irritable, he should make an extra effort not to irritate her. Be nice to her. Be helpful. Ask about her well-being. How do you feel? Is there anything I can do for you? Showing that he is sensitive to her state of having a period. Appropriate manner of speech. Some women will be upset being called Tomei, you're Tomei or something. We're now in Halachic state or nidah state. That's some might prefer that, and also to be sensitive in No, if she gets upset and screams at the husband shouldn't scream back. These kind of things is important that a chassan teacher should explain to the chassanim, because they have never experienced that. This is a whole new area in life. So, practically speaking, when a woman becomes a nidah, for how long is she a nidah? So, usually, for most women, it comes about every 4 weeks, and she's a nidah for about 2 weeks out of the 4 weeks. And then she becomes tahira, is tahira for about 2 weeks, and then she has another period. So that's what people call the 2 weeks on, 2 weeks off, but it's not so accurate, because usually the nidah state is about 12 days, which is a little bit under 2 weeks. And then after that, usually the tara is a little bit more than 2 weeks, which doesn't mean that they can have relations the entire time, because towards the end of the cycle come the days of vestes, when it is also forbidden to have relations. But usually for about 2 weeks, she is tahira and muteris lebaila. Exceptions, when a woman doesn't get her periods, is during pregnancy. Like explained before, when a woman has her period, that means that she didn't get pregnant, because during pregnancy, the blood gets channeled to the development of the fetus. That's usually also how a couple finds out that they're pregnant. A woman anticipates a period. She knows about when to expect it. Okay, like we said before, it's not clockwork. It might be delayed by a day or 2 or 3. But if it's delayed 4, 5, 6 days, 7 days, it's already a week after it was meant to come, probably, not for sure, but probably, she's expecting. They can buy a pregnancy test in a pharmacy and find out if indeed she's pregnant. If it's not pregnancy, sometimes the test was done a bit too early. The different chemicals in the urine can't show it yet. Let them repeat the test a few days later again. If it's still negative, there might be something else going on. They might want to consult a doctor about it. But usually during pregnancy for 9 months, the woman does not have periods, and she's tahira the entire time of pregnancy. A few points that are important to make here is, and it's important to tell this to Chassanim, that doesn't mean that the entire 9 months, although she is tahira, that you can always have relations. Because during pregnancy, a lot of times, a woman has what is called morning sickness, but anyone who is married and has a few children will tell you it's not morning, it's erev, tzorayim v'erev. It's any time of day and night that a woman might be nauseous, might throw up, and there can be other issues going on during pregnancy that might prevent the couple from having relations at certain times. But overall, she's in a state of tahara for 9 months. That's one nekuda. And another important point is that while normally during pregnancy there is no blood and she's tahara for the 9 months, at times there can be complications, and a woman can see blood during pregnancy. Now, usually if there's blood during pregnancy, she should speak to a doctor why that happened. There can be a concern over here. Okay, but she also becomes a nidah. We don't say that during pregnancy a woman can't become a nidah. It's just that during pregnancy, usually she won't be a nidah. Some women experience some bleeding in the first month of pregnancy, implantational bleeding, and that would also make a woman a nidah, but that is something to throw in there, that happens sometimes, and they have to understand that is normal and it's not a problem. After giving birth, that varies from woman to woman, and not only from woman to woman, even the same woman, it varies from one birth to the next. After giving birth, a woman might have a long stretch without periods. Usually that only works when a woman is actually nursing the baby, and It can be maybe for a year, maybe a half a year, maybe she will get periods, but not regular. Every 2-3 months she'll have a period. It'll take her like a year or so to get back into the monthly cycle, unless she gets pregnant again. So after childbirth, it is also normal not to have the monthly cycle. And that's while nursing, which goes together. How a woman enters the state of Nida. So there are different ways how a woman enters the state of Nida. We discussed the classical example, getting a period. But the Torah does not say that a period makes a woman a Nida. What the Torah says is blood leaving the uterus makes a woman a Nida. The normal example for that is indeed the period, but it's not limited to that. Sometimes a woman might experience bleeding randomly in the middle of the cycle. It might be caused by something, or it might just be random without any known cause. That might make a woman a Nida as well. Like I just said, the Torah doesn't say that a vesis makes her a Nida, a period makes her a Nida. Rather, what it says in Parshas Metzora, Dam yeh zeiva bipsaro, when there is going to be a flow of blood from her uterus, it makes her a Nida. How much blood? No shear is given. It can be any amount, even a minute amount of blood leaving the uterus can render a woman a Nida. Sometimes there are questions, and while a bacher could have gone years and years and never spoken to a Rav about any halachic question, a younger man must be in contact with a Rav. He must have a Rav that he consults with shaylos. Every so often, there might be a question if something makes her a Nida or doesn't make her a Nida. Yeah, a full flow, a period, that makes her always a Nida. There's no question about that. But a little amount of blood here and there, sometimes it indeed makes her a Nida, sometimes not, and sometimes there are questions, different types of questions, that there's questions due to the color, as will be explained in the further shiurim, and sometimes there are questions that we suspect that the blood came from some type of wound. These type of questions one must consult with a Rav, Meirei Rav Bebayil. Not anyone who got smicha as a bacher in 770 can answer these questions. One needs to go to a competent Rav, a Rav Meirei Rav, and ask the questions. There is Tuma Deraisa and there is Tuma Derabanan. In the pasuk that I just quoted before, it says, Dam hiya zeiva bipsara. The wording is difficult to understand. Dam hiya zeiva bipsara, in her flesh. It should really say, we might think, Dam hiya zeiva mibesara, that blood comes out from her basar, from her body. Why does it say that there's going to be a flow of blood in her body? So the Gemara says that with that, the Torah is telling us a condition that a woman becomes a Nida only if she felt the blood trickling out bipsara while still in her flesh. As it leaves the uterus and enters the cervix, that initial release, some type of inner tremor, something like that she would feel, and that, if she felt that, then she's a Nida. However, if she didn't feel that, she only discovered the blood once it's already outside of her body, that would not make her a Nida. Why? That's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu decided. That is minat Torah, but midrabanan, they made a gzeira that also blood without feeling that hargosha, that sensation, can render her a nida as well. That's called tumas ksomim, a kesem, a stain. Midiraisa, whenever we use the term kesem or ksomim in these halachas, we are talking about blood that she didn't feel when it came out. She only discovered it once it was already outside, which minat Torah is not tameh, but Chachamim gozru al aksam, Chachamim made a gzeira that also blood without hargosha would render a woman a nida. but not always. They made certain conditions, sometimes yes, sometimes not. But we will leave these additional halachas, differentiating between Tumah Deraisa and Tumah Derabanan, and all those practical halachas for the next year, Be'ezras Hashem.